anyone ever looked right through you, like you were nothing but furniture in a room they were about to redecorate? That happened to me at my son's engagement dinner. I was 67 years old, wearing the same flannel shirt I'd worn to 100 Sunday suppers, and the woman my son was about to marry looked at me like I was something she'd tracked in on her shoe. I think about that evening a lot, not because it hurt, though it did, at first. I think about it because of what happened 3 weeks later, and because my son, my quiet, careful son, finally said the thing he should have said the night it started. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Harlan. I live outside Orangeville, Ontario, on a property my father built a workshop on in 1971, and that I've been running as a custom furniture and millwork operation ever since. We do cabinets, staircases, built-ins, mostly residential, some commercial. It's not glamorous work. My hands show it. My truck shows it. My clothes, frankly, show it. I raised my son, Marcus, alone after his mother passed when he was 11. Pancreatic cancer, fast and cruel. We figured things out together. School pickups, bad haircuts, frozen lasagna more nights than I care to admit. He grew up quiet and serious and kind. And when he got his civil engineering degree from Waterloo, I sat in that auditorium and I cried like I had no business crying in public. He didn't say anything about it. He just handed me a napkin from his jacket pocket. He'd thought to bring one. He was 32 when he told me he was seeing someone. Her name was Petra. She worked in corporate finance downtown Toronto, lived in a condo in Liberty Village, drove a white BMW she leased. He described her the way you describe someone you're slightly nervous about, with too much detail, like you're building a case. I told him I was glad he was happy. I meant it. I met her twice before the engagement dinner, once for coffee near her office, once at a holiday party at a friend's place in Mississauga. She was polished, very polished, the kind of polished that takes real effort to maintain and that reads, after a while, as its own kind of armor. She was perfectly pleasant to me both times, not warm, but pleasant. I didn't think much of it. Not everyone clicks with a 67-year-old man who smells faintly of linseed oil. The engagement dinner was her parents' idea, a restaurant in Yorkville. One of those places with no prices on the menu and a sommelier who materializes at your elbow before you've even sat down. Her father, Lawrence, was a commercial real estate developer. Her mother, Vivienne, sat very straight and wore a blazer that probably cost more than my first truck. They had the relaxed confidence of people who have never once had to think about whether they could afford the wine. Marcus picked me up. He'd offered to, said parking downtown was a headache, and I appreciated it. I wore clean slacks and a button-up shirt. I'd shined my shoes. I looked like what I was, a working man who'd made an effort. We arrived before Petra's family. Marcus was nervous. I could tell by the way he kept straightening the cutlery. I put my hand on his arm and told him it was just dinner. They arrived together. Petra, Lawrence, Vivienne, and Petra's younger sister, Simone, who was visiting from Vancouver. There were hugs and introductions. I shook Lawrence's hand. He had the handshake of someone who'd taken a course on handshakes. Then Vivienne looked at me, really looked at me, and asked in a tone that was somehow both polite and not, "And what is it you do, Harlan?" I told her I ran a millwork shop in Orangeville. There was a pause, the kind of pause that has a meaning. "Oh," she said, "how quaint." I let it go. People say things. I've been in enough rooms where I'm clearly the odd one out to know that making a scene helps no one and that sometimes the best response is just to eat your appetizer. But then, about 20 minutes in, after 2 glasses of wine had loosened the evening a little, Lawrence started talking about a renovation project, a heritage building in the distillery district he was converting to office space. "Beautiful bones," he said, "original brick, old-growth Douglas fir floors." He talked about it the way developers talk about old things, with admiration and a faint competitive edge, like the building was something to be conquered. I mentioned, because it was relevant, that I'd done millwork restoration on 2 buildings in that district. Period joinery. Hand-cut dovetails to match the original construction. I'd spent 4 months on one of them. Lawrence nodded in that way where he hadn't actually listened, and said, yes, there are a lot of tradespeople in that area." Tradespeople. I'm not ashamed of being a tradesperson. I'm one. But the word landed the way he intended it to land, as a category, a ceiling, a way of placing me in the correct drawer and closing it. Petra, who had been quiet through this, leaned slightly towards Simone and said something I wasn't meant to hear. "But I heard it," she said. "He drove up in that truck. I told Marcus." And Simone, to her credit, looked uncomfortable. She glanced at me. I looked back at my bread plate. Marcus had heard it too. I saw his jaw tighten. But he didn't say anything. He picked up his wine glass. I understood why. He was trying to keep the peace. He loved this woman. I wasn't going to make it harder for him. But I'll be honest with you. That was the moment something in me went quiet. Not angry. I've never been a man who runs hot, but quiet in the way that means you've stopped trying to be something for someone and started simply watching. The dinner continued. The food was excellent. Lawrence held court. He talked about interest rates, about a rezoning he was managing in Brampton, about a colleague's place in Muskoka. I listened. I asked a question here and there. I was genuinely interested, actually. Commercial real estate development overlaps more with what I do than he would have guessed. But I didn't push it. He wasn't asking. When the bill came, Lawrence waved it away with the satisfaction of a man who considers picking up the tab a form of architecture. I thanked him. It was a nice dinner. In the truck on the way back up the 400, Marcus was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I'm sorry, Dad." I told him he didn't need to apologize. He said, "I should have said something." I told him the truth. "You will, when the time's right." He looked at me. I kept my eyes on the road. 3 weeks later, Marcus called me on a Thursday evening. He sounded strange. Not upset, exactly, but tightly wound, like a spring that's been turned one click too many. He told me that Lawrence had been trying to reach him through Petra. Apparently Lawrence was interested in the millwork restoration work on the distillery district property. He'd looked into it after the dinner, or someone had, and found out that the building I'd mentioned, the one on Cherry Street, had been written up in an Ontario Heritage Trust newsletter. The restoration had been cited specifically. And then someone had dug a bit further. What they found was this. My shop, Kellerman Millwork, that's my late wife's maiden name. I kept it after she passed because it was hers and it was good, had done restoration work on 11 heritage properties in Ontario over the past 20 years. We were on the approved contractor list for Parks Canada. We had an open contract with the Ontario Heritage Trust for consultation services. The Cherry Street job had been referenced in an academic paper on traditional joinery methods published by a professor at Ryerson. And there was one other thing. About 9 years ago, a developer, a friend of a friend, a man I'd known for 30 years, had come to me with a problem. He had a portfolio of older commercial properties that needed significant structural millwork restoration to pass heritage designation review. Banks were hesitant to finance heritage properties at the time, and the cost of proper restoration was scaring off investors. He'd asked if I'd be willing to take an equity stake in 2 of the properties instead of straight payment, because he was short on cash and long on inventory. I'd said yes. I knew the buildings. I knew what they were worth, or what they'd be worth if the work was done right. Those 2 properties were now worth, conservatively, somewhere north of $4 million combined, and because of how the arrangement had been structured, a holding company my accountant had set up. It didn't show up anywhere obvious. I didn't talk about it. I drove the same truck. I wore the same shirts. I didn't need anyone to know. Lawrence had found out anyway. Marcus told me that Lawrence had called Petra in a bit of a state. That he wanted to have lunch with me. That he was suddenly very interested in my opinion on the distillery district project. That he described me, according to Petra, as a very interesting man. Marcus paused after that last part. Then he said quietly, "He called you a very interesting man, Dad." The same man Petra called a truck driver at dinner. I didn't say anything for a moment. I was watching the light fade over the back field. "She didn't call me a truck driver," I said. "She implied it," he said. "And I didn't say anything. And I didn't say anything. And I should have." There it was. The thing I'd told him he'd say when the time was right. He'd gotten there himself. I asked him how he was doing with all of it, with Petra. He was quiet for a while. Then he said he'd been thinking about some things, about what he wanted, about whether the person you want to build a life with should be someone who looks at your father and decides he's not worth talking to. Before he's even opened his mouth, I told him I wasn't going to tell him what to do. He said he knew that. I asked him if he was happy. Another long pause. I thought I was, he said. I didn't push. That was his to work through. Lawrence called me the following Tuesday. He was charming. I'll give him that. He had a real gift for warmth when warmth served a purpose. He asked about the Heritage Project. He asked smart questions. He'd clearly done his reading. I answered honestly and without theatrics. I told him what I thought the Douglas fir floors needed, what kind of contractor he should be looking for, what mistakes I'd seen other restorations make. At the end of the call, he said, "I'd love to sit down properly, Harlan. I feel like we got off on the wrong foot at dinner." I said, "We didn't get off on the wrong foot, Lawrence. You got your impression and I got mine. That's different." Silence. Then, "Fair enough." I told him I'd think about the consultation. I meant it was interesting work, but I want to be clear about something. The point of this story isn't the money. It isn't that I had something Lawrence wanted, and so suddenly I mattered. That's not the part that stayed with me. The part that stayed with me was Simone, Petra's younger sister. About a week after the Lawrence phone call, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. It said, "Hi Harlan, this is Simone, Petra's sister. I hope you don't mind Marcus giving me your number. I just wanted to say that the dinner was not okay and I'm sorry I didn't say so at the time. I've been thinking about it." I sat with that text for a long time. I wrote back, "Thank you, Simone. That means something." She replied, "My mum was raised working class. She forgets that sometimes. I don't want to forget it." I didn't respond to that one. I didn't need to. She'd said it to say it, not to get a reply. As for Marcus and Petra, they called off the engagement in October. Marcus told me over the phone, steady and calm, the way he'd gotten through hard things since he was 11. He said it was mutual, that they both realized something had shifted, that they wanted different things. He didn't elaborate, and I didn't press. I drove down to Toronto that Saturday, and we went to a diner near his apartment. Eggs and coffee, and the kind of easy silence that only exists between people who've been through things together. He didn't seem broken. He seemed lighter, actually, the way you look when you've put something down that was heavier than you admitted. He said, "You know what I think about sometimes?" I said, "What?" He said, "That night you cried at my graduation, and you had a napkin ready." I laughed. He laughed. "I was prepared to cry," I said. "I'd been waiting 12 years for that day." He looked at me across the table. My son, this quiet, careful, decent man I'd somehow had a hand in raising, and he said, "I should have said something at that dinner, Dad, about the truck comment. I was trying to keep everything smooth and I let it go. I won't do that again." I told him I knew. He said, "I mean it." I said, "I know you mean it. That's why I'm not worried." We finished our eggs. He paid, which he always insists on now, and which I let him do because it matters to him. We walked out into a grey October morning in Toronto, and I drove back up the 400 toward Orangeville with the windows cracked, the way I always drive when I need to think. I thought about my wife, about what she would have made of all this. She'd have had something dry and precise to say about Rivienne's blazer. She'd have liked Simone. I thought about the Cherry Street building. 4 months of work, matching 140-year-old joinery by hand, getting the profiles right, the proportions right. The kind of work nobody sees unless they know what they're looking at. I thought about Lawrence, and about how a man can look at a flannel shirt and a half-ton truck and build an entire theory of a person from those 2 data points, and how that theory can be so completely wrong, and how he'll never quite stop being embarrassed about it, and how that's not really my problem. I've lived 67 years, I've buried a wife and raised a son, and built things with my hands that will outlast me by a century if the joinery holds. And it will hold, because I cut every piece myself and I don't cut corners, and I never have. I don't need anyone to know all that before they decide whether to talk to me. But I'll tell you, it's a good feeling when they find out anyway. I've been thinking about that bread plate a lot lately, the way I stared at it when Petra leaned over to her sister and said what she said. Something about the truck, about Marcus bringing me in that truck. There's a version of me, a younger version, who might have said something sharp back, who might have made the evening uncomfortable for everyone and called it standing up for himself. I'm glad I'm not that man anymore, Because what I've learned, slowly and sometimes painfully over 67 years, is that the way you respond to being underestimated tells you more about yourself than it tells them anything. I didn't say anything that night because I didn't need to, not out of cowardice, out of something closer to clarity. I'd done the work. I knew what the work was worth. A comment made behind a hand at a restaurant in Yorkville doesn't change what's sitting in a title registry in Toronto, or in a Parks Canada contract file, or in a peer-reviewed paper about traditional joinery. I didn't need Lawrence to see me clearly. I just needed to see myself clearly. That's the thing nobody tells you when you're young, that your own honest accounting of who you are is the only one that actually matters day to day. What got to me, what really got to me, wasn't the slight itself. It was watching Marcus absorb it. I knew what he was doing, keeping things smooth, holding the peace, protecting something he thought he wanted. I've done that, most people have, but there's a cost to it. Every time you let something go that you should have named, you teach the person beside you that the thing is nameable. And Marcus is a smart man. He got there, he said at a diner table over eggs and bad coffee. I won't do that again. And I believed him, because I know the difference between someone performing a promise and someone who's actually arrived at one. That's the thing about integrity. It's not a switch you flip, it's a direction you keep choosing. Petra's father was a sharp man, genuinely capable, but he built a habit of measuring people by the surface. The suit, the address, the car. That's a form of intellectual laziness dressed up as discernment. Real judgment takes more work. It asks you to sit with someone long enough to find out what they actually know, what they've actually built, what they've actually survived. Lawrence never did that work with me. He paid for it, not dramatically, just quietly. In embarrassment, in a revised opinion he had to arrive at alone, in a phone call he had to make that cost him something. And Marcus, my careful, serious son. He made a hard call in October without asking me to validate it. He'd looked at the situation honestly, weighed what it meant about the future, and chose clarity over comfort. That's not easy when you're 32 and you thought you knew where you were headed. That kind of courage, the quiet, domestic kind, the kind nobody applauds, is the thing I'm most proud of in him. More than the degree, more than anything. I drove back up the 400 that Saturday with the windows cracked and the grey October light flat across the fields, and I felt, honestly, fine, not triumphant, not vindicated, just fine. The way you feel when things have settled back to true. That's usually how it goes in my experience. Not with fanfare, just with the quiet return of things being what they actually are.